The world knew him as a prince, a ruler of hearts, a poet of deserts, a man whose words could make even the wind pause in reverence. But behind the crown, behind the grace and the glory, there lived a soul that had loved only once, and loved so deeply that even eternity couldn't erase her name. She wasn't just his muse, she was his forever. The untold poem of Sheikh Hamdan was not written in ink, it was carved into the silence between his breaths, into the rhythm of his pulse, into the very sky he prayed beneath. He first saw her not in splendor, but in simplicity. She wasn't adorned in jewels or gold, yet she carried a light that no diamond could compete with. Her laughter danced like a melody meant only for him, and in that moment, time ceased to exist. He had met beauty before, countless faces, royal and radiant, but she was something beyond. She was the kind of presence that didn't just enter a room, she rewrote the air itself. In her eyes, he saw not reflection, but recognition, as though his soul had finally found where it belonged. From that day, his poetry changed. The world thought he was inspired by stars, by deserts, by the divine beauty of creation. But what they didn't know was that every verse, every rhythm, every whisper of his pen was her shadow taking form. He wrote of winds that carried secrets, of oceans that remembered love, of moons that lingered too long, all metaphors for her. She was not just the muse of his art, she was the heartbeat behind his words, the invisible signature that turned mere language into emotion. At night, when the palace lights dimmed and the world slept, he wrote to her in silence. The moon became his witness, and his pen became his confessor. She wasn't made of time, he once wrote, she was made of forever. Every letter he wrote was a confession of longing too vast for speech. He didn't need her to read them, it was enough that the universe did. For Fazza knew that some loves are too holy for paper, they live instead in the spaces between words, where only hearts can hear. There were moments when duty called louder than desire, when the world demanded the prince instead of the man, and he obeyed, with loyalty, with grace, with honor. But even as he fulfilled the roles the world had written for him, there remained one role that was his truth, her poet. She lived quietly in his verses, hidden from the eyes of the public, protected by the shield of metaphors. To the world, she was an idea. To him, she was home. He often wondered if she ever knew how deeply he had loved her, how every poem the world celebrated was just another attempt to keep her alive. Perhaps she had guessed, perhaps she hadn't. But what mattered was that his soul knew, and so did hers. Sometimes, when they crossed paths in the soft light of events or fleeting glances, their silence spoke volumes. That single look, that single breath between them, was poetry in its purest form, unwritten, unspoken, eternal. The years passed, but love did not fade. Instead, it transformed into something higher, a devotion untouched by time or distance. He no longer needed to see her to feel her, she lived in the scent of rain, in the calm of dawn, in the whispers of his heart when the world fell asleep. She had become his stillness and his storm, his muse and his meaning. There was no Fazza without her, no poem that didn't trace back to the first day their souls collided. Sometimes, he'd sit beneath the desert sky, watching the constellations draw invisible maps of memory. The sand beneath him remembered their unspoken moments, the stars above him carried the light of her eyes. He had written poems for millions, but she was the one poem he never finished, not because he couldn't, but because he didn't want to. Some stories, he believed, should remain open-ended, like prayers whispered but never concluded. The world will remember Sheikh Hamdan for his words, his compassion, his legacy. But what the world will never fully know is the love that built it all. She was his hidden inspiration, his silent victory, his forever. Her existence turned his poetry into prayer, his longing into art, his life into legend. He was never just writing about love, he was writing her. There were times when his hand trembled as he wrote, not from weakness, but from awe. To love her was to feel the weight of.
That was the truth of his existence. His forever wasn't a future with her by his side, it was the eternity of feeling her within him. To the world, it seemed like heartbreak, to him, it was divine connection. In the quiet of his heart, he built her a kingdom, not of gold, but of words. Each poem was a palace, each line a bridge connecting them through time. And though she may have walked her own path, her essence never strayed from his. He carried her in his prayers, not as a wish, but as gratitude. For meeting her, for feeling something so sacred, for discovering the kind of love that poets die trying to describe. Sometimes, at twilight, when the wind whispered through the dunes, he could almost hear her voice, soft, distant, eternal. It wasn't memory, it was presence. And in that moment, he would close his eyes and smile, knowing that love like theirs didn't need witnesses. It existed in the sacred quiet between two souls who had once touched infinity. She had never meant to love him, not a prince, not a poet, not a man the world would forever claim as its own. Yet love had a way of choosing its path, and hers led quietly toward him. She often wondered if he ever knew how many times she had read his verses beneath the dim glow of her lamp, tracing every word as though it were a secret meant only for her. Each poem felt like a whisper through the wind, carrying a piece of his soul. She collected them not as a fan, but as a keeper of something sacred, fragments of a love that lived beyond confession. In her own solitude, she began to write too, not for fame, not for the world, but for him. Her words were gentle echoes of the ones he once wrote, hidden in notebooks the world would never see. He taught me, she once penned, that love doesn't demand to be seen, it only asks to be felt. She poured her soul into every page, hoping somehow, somewhere, the universe would let him feel the warmth of her silent devotion. He was the pulse behind every metaphor, the heartbeat between every line she dared to write. There were nights she would stand beneath the same moon he had often written about, her heart whispering prayers into the same endless sky. She could almost sense him, his presence, his thoughts, his unspoken longing blending with the air. Sometimes, it felt as if the stars themselves carried messages between them, threads of invisible light weaving two hearts across distance and time. She didn't need to see him to know he still wrote her name in his silence. She could feel it, in the stillness, in the poetry that refused to fade. Life carried her forward, as it always does. The world around her changed, seasons came and went, but one thing never did, the way her soul stirred whenever she thought of him. She never sought to replace that feeling, nor to bury it. Instead, she nurtured it quietly, turning her love into prayer, her memory into peace. She had come to understand that what they shared